Welcome back to the program. I'm Sophia Bennett. Ladies and gentlemen, while international media cameras were focused on the warm handshakes and diplomatic smiles between President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People, outside observers may have imagined an atmosphere of complete calm surrounding the summit. However, behind the velvet curtain of lavish ceremonial protocol lay a very different reality, a series of escalating tensions, direct confrontations, and even physical clashes between the security forces of the world's two superpowers. Throughout the two-day visit in Beijing, the summit's backstage operations turned into a miniature conflict zone in terms of protocol and security. From an incident in which a White House staff member was trampled during chaotic scenes involving local media, to a 30-minute armed standoff between United States Secret Service agents and Chinese security personnel at the Temple of Heaven, the events exposed the stark differences and the deeply complicated nature of relations between the two superpowers. At the same time, the host nation's efforts to make conditions difficult, from restricting access to basic necessities for the American press corps to implementing aggressive high-tech surveillance measures, were far more than simple logistical problems. They were also part of a broader psychological and strategic battle, where every square meter of territory and every security regulation was used to assert sovereignty and national status. This program will take a deeper look into the hidden side, rarely seen by the public, where the professionalism of American agents collided head-on with the rigidity of the host government, painting a vivid and dramatic picture of what truly happened behind one of the most important political events of 2026. The chaotic reality behind the scenes. Ladies and gentlemen, according to major international media outlets such as the Financial Times, Hindustan Times, The Washington Post, and Chosun Daily, there were incidents of disorder, physical confrontations, and rising tensions between security personnel from both sides during President Trump's state visit to Beijing, which took place from May 13th through May 15th. According to members of the traveling press delegation, a chaotic atmosphere erupted shortly before the bilateral meeting began. As a large crowd of Chinese reporters surged into the conference area, they knocked down and trampled a female White House advanced staff member. Although she suffered bruising and severe shock, the staffer was fortunately not seriously injured. The incident immediately triggered angry reactions from members of the United States delegation, who condemned what they described as the local media's lack of crowd control. At the same time, a tense 30-minute standoff unfolded at the Temple of Heaven. Chinese authorities prevented a United States Secret Service agent from entering the event area because he was carrying a firearm, a standard American security protocol that Chinese officials refused to accept. The American press delegation firmly halted all movement until the agent was allowed to accompany them. In the end, another agent who had already passed through security screening was brought in as a replacement to escort the delegation, while the original agent was forced to remain behind. Tensions escalated further after the tour when Chinese officials held American journalists inside a separate room, preventing them from returning to the presidential motorcade. White House staff members engaged in heated arguments with Chinese authorities. One U.S. official declared that the Trump administration would never treat the Chinese side this way if the situation were reversed. As the motorcade prepared to depart, a White House staffer signaled, "Let's go." The United States delegation was forced to physically push through Chinese security barriers and run across the Temple of Heaven complex in order to reach the vehicles in time. Reporters stated that they were placed under strict control, had their drinking water confiscated, and were restricted from using restroom facilities despite temperatures exceeding 27 degrees Celsius under intense heat. While the group of journalists was moving across the Temple of Heaven grounds, another group of Chinese officials reportedly attempted to stop them again by physically blocking their path with outstretched arms. Nevertheless, the American side continued pushing forward and ultimately managed to reach the presidential motorcade. Unexpectedly, all of the chaotic scenes were captured on camera by the film crew of director Brett Ratner, known for the Rush Hour franchise. He accompanied President Trump aboard Air Force One during the trip with the purpose of scouting locations for Rush Hour 4. The project was reportedly revived at the personal request of President Trump. The film crew was using the visit to evaluate lighting conditions and filming locations in Beijing ahead of the movie's planned production launch later this year. Prior to the trip, amid concerns over cyber espionage and extensive surveillance operations in the Chinese capital, the entire United States delegation, including business leaders such as Elon Musk and Tim Cook, was instructed to use temporary phones and temporary email accounts throughout the two-day summit. The security requirements on each side may have differed in approach, but they were equally strict down to the smallest detail. This was not the first time backstage clashes had erupted between security personnel from both countries. A similar incident took place during President Trump's visit to China in 2017. That time, the confrontation reportedly escalated into an actual physical altercation. While President Trump and President Xi were holding talks, security personnel from both sides allegedly exchanged punches and shoves to the point that others had to physically pull them apart. The Wall Street Journal only briefly mentioned the incident in its reporting. But in February 2018, the Australian news outlet news.com.au published a far more detailed account based on 5 sources familiar with the matter. Later, networks such as CNBC and The Guardian also republished the story. According to those reports, on November 9, 2017, when President Trump arrived at the Great Hall of the People for talks with President Xi Jinping, a U.S. military aide accompanying him was carrying the black briefcase commonly known as the nuclear football, or the nuclear briefcase. As we know, it is an inseparable part of the American presidency, containing the codes and systems connected to the nation's strategic weapons arsenal. Chinese security personnel reportedly blocked the aide from entering and insisted on conducting a strict security inspection, refusing to allow the nuclear briefcase inside without being checked. Naturally, the American side could not permit Chinese officials to open the case for inspection. As a result, U.S. security personnel refused, while the Chinese side continued insisting on carrying out the search. At that moment, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, himself a former military officer, reportedly rushed over and ordered the aide to continue moving forward without waiting for Chinese approval. However, a Chinese official suddenly grabbed Kelly. Kelly reportedly shoved the individual's hand away. Immediately afterwards, Secret Service agents assigned to Kelly's office restrained the Chinese security officer, and forced him to the ground. Both sides then reportedly became physically aggressive before others intervened and pulled them apart, preventing the situation from escalating further. Some people may wonder whether incidents like these are not coordinated in advance. In reality, state visits of this magnitude are typically prepared anywhere from 6 months to an entire year ahead of time. During that process, both sides negotiate and confirm even the smallest details imaginable, details so specific that ordinary people could hardly picture them. On the surface, people may think it resembles a live television broadcast, where every sentence, every pause, and every movement must be rehearsed beforehand to ensure not a single word is out of place. The schedule itself must also be followed with absolute precision. In fact, Beijing's leadership reportedly even specifies at which exact step music should begin playing and at which step it should stop. Yet even something as simple as a leader's footsteps often has to be carefully managed behind the scenes by subordinates to ensure everything unfolds perfectly. But it did not stop there. Behind those carefully staged public appearances were countless additional security concerns that had to be managed, including overall health, food safety to ensure there was no risk of poisoning, and information security. In general, the privacy and personal safety requirements surrounding national leaders operate under extraordinarily strict standards to an almost extreme degree. In an article titled "The Strategy Behind Xi Jinping's Security System," published in November 2023, the Wall Street Journal recounted a particularly fascinating story. The incident took place during the APEC 2023 summit in San Francisco in November 2023. After his official meeting with President Joe Biden at Filali, a historic estate in Woodside on the outskirts of San Francisco, Xi Jinping attended a working lunch. At the time, a group of accompanying security agents, physically imposing men standing roughly 6 feet 3 inches tall and dressed in dark suits, formed what appeared to be an impenetrable human shield around him. After Xi finished his meal and stood up, restaurant staff members were not permitted to approach. Instead, members of his security team immediately rushed forward and collected every item he had used, including bowls, chopsticks, drinking glasses, and napkins, while also spraying them with an unidentified liquid. The primary purpose was reportedly to destroy any DNA traces contained in saliva or skin cells left behind on those objects. According to the reports, Chinese authorities feared that foreign intelligence agencies could analyze such biological material to uncover potential medical conditions or genetic weaknesses, predict life expectancy, evaluate stress tolerance, and gather other highly sensitive information considered top-level state secrets in Beijing. Their view is that any information, no matter how minor, related to a leader's health could trigger political instability or be exploited by geopolitical rivals. And what about the American side? The situation there is no less dramatic. For officials directly responsible for coordinating these operations, such as Rick Waters, a former State Department official who helped prepare President Trump's 2017 visit to China. Every state visit is essentially a massive logistical campaign carried out under overwhelming pressure, almost like a nightmare. From the moment Air Force One touches down on the runway to the takeover of entire hotels, every detail, no matter how small, must be pre-programmed in advance. President Trump's delegation typically consists of a powerful entourage that includes media organizations, cabinet members, and some of America's most influential business magnates. Since they do not all travel aboard the same aircraft, their presence requires a large accompanying fleet of support planes. Before the president even arrives, specialized armored vehicles and secure communication systems are already transported to the destination site. Teams of Secret Service agents, security personnel, and White House telecommunications experts operate as advance units, conducting security sweeps, establishing anti-surveillance protection systems, and engaging in tense negotiations with Chinese authorities. The rigidity of the host government becomes especially apparent in its weapons control policies. The American side must submit formal diplomatic requests for every firearm or radio device they intend to bring into the country, adding even more complexity and pressure to an already enormous operation. In addition, the president's personal safety is treated as the highest priority, with a dedicated medical team standing by at all times. Even aboard Air Force One, there is a fully equipped surgical suite containing advanced medical technology. Even the menu itself becomes part of a security battlefield, where every ingredient is subjected to strict inspection in order to eliminate any possible risk of poisoning or contamination. In the world of high-level diplomatic travel, every link in the chain of operations must function with split-second precision. Back in 2017, the preparations were already intensely stressful. By 2026, however, security measures had been elevated to an entirely new level, far more complex than before. This time, accompanying President Trump were not merely politicians, but a powerful alliance of 16 of the world's most influential figures across key sectors, including technology, finance, military affairs, and manufacturing. The presence of some of the richest billionaires on the planet, such as Elon Musk, transformed the security equation into something even more layered and complicated. This was no longer simply a mission to protect a head of state. It became an operation to safeguard the economic and technological brains of the United States against risks ranging from cyber espionage to assassination threats. In particular, alongside government protection, billionaires such as Musk also traveled with their own private security teams, creating an extraordinarily massive and overlapping security network. To meet this unprecedented scale, the United States launched an enormous logistical operation. Videos that spread widely across social media showed military cargo aircraft continuously landing in Beijing, transporting record amounts of security equipment and armored vehicles. Many observers argued that this was no longer just a diplomatic visit. Instead, President Trump had effectively brought an entire mobile White House directly into the Chinese capital, establishing an absolute security fortress in the very center of the host nation's power structure. Ahead of the May 2026 trip, the White House also established an unprecedented form of digital fortress designed to guarantee complete information security for the president and the delegation of leading global technology and financial figures. Under special cybersecurity protocol, every member of the delegation was required to use temporary communication devices and disposable email accounts, all of which would be collected and destroyed immediately after departing Beijing in order to eliminate any risk of malware infection. The American side completely isolated the delegation from local network infrastructure by deploying its own encrypted satellite communication systems and independent mobile transmission stations. At the same time, all biometric and GPS tracking functions on devices were disabled to prevent unauthorized data collection. At lodging sites, specialists established mobile SIF isolation zones to block radio signals and continuously sweep for electronic surveillance devices, effectively turning the entire delegation into an impenetrable island of information operating in the middle of the host country's extensive surveillance system. The causes behind the chaos and confrontations. Ladies and gentlemen, there are many reasons behind the confusion and even the physical clashes between security personnel from both sides, including the incidents in 2017 and the more recent events that have already been discussed. First, the timing of the summit meeting was postponed multiple times and was only confirmed at the very last minute, creating a chain reaction of disruptions. American and Chinese security teams did not have enough time to conduct joint on-site rehearsals and coordination exercises. Without synchronized operational scenarios, each side automatically activated its own independent protection protocols, leading to situations where the two security systems effectively collided with one another when problems emerged. The White House advance team, which is normally expected to finalize every security arrangement before the president arrives, was forced to work under intense time pressure. As a result, many issues including whether armed Secret Service agents would be permitted inside the Temple of Heaven remained unresolved in a gray area, ultimately leading to direct confrontation at the scene itself. Outside the official schedule, reports from the ground and videos circulating across social media showed that Beijing authorities launched a rapid urban beautification campaign ahead of President Trump's visit and the arrival of the American delegation. This reportedly included resurfacing roads and carrying out overnight construction work in preparation for the summit. Second, because of the extremely high importance of the meeting and the massive size of the American delegation, organizers were forced to meet extraordinarily strict security requirements. As a result, no matter how long preparations lasted beforehand, the operation still represented an enormous workload involving countless moving parts that had to be considered simultaneously. Put simply, the more people involved, the more problems inevitably arise. That is simply the nature of such operations. Third, the two sides approach security through fundamentally different cultures and philosophies. The American side prioritizes flexibility and the ability of agents to adapt quickly to changing situations. The Chinese side, by contrast, prioritizes rigid adherence to predefined procedures and layered systems of control. When even a small schedule change occurs, for example, if President Trump decides to stop and speak with someone longer than expected, the Chinese security apparatus often responds by freezing all surrounding areas. This can result in journalists being locked inside rooms or physically blocked from moving through certain areas. Fourth, pressure from the local media also played a major role. The incident in which an American press staff member was trampled was not necessarily the result of a deliberate security operation, but rather the consequence of fierce competition among media organizations. Chinese reporters were reportedly under heavy pressure to capture exclusive images showing warmth and closeness between the two leaders. When the doors to the meeting room opened, the lack of discipline and crowd management from local security personnel transformed what should have been an orderly process into outright chaos. But no matter how perfectly everything is prepared, clashes can still happen. Why is that? Because the gap between the public promises made openly and the private assumptions each side keeps to itself will eventually erupt into conflict. That brings us to the fifth cause, a clash over jurisdiction and authority. The reality is that even after both sides sign security memorandums and formal agreements, once operations move into the field, each side still wants to assert its own sovereignty. The Chinese side has always operated under the belief that, on our soil, our laws are supreme. Chinese authorities view armed American agents entering sensitive historical sites, such as the Temple of Heaven, as a violation of national security sovereignty. Meanwhile, the United States Secret Service operates under an uncompromising doctrine when it comes to protecting the president and accompanying delegations. They never surrender their weapons, nor do they allow protected individuals to move beyond the sight of armed agents. And the final cause is what many describe as the host nation's deliberate flexibility. Diplomatic experts often refer to this as pressure tactics, on the ground put more plainly. However, it can be understood as the use of calculated maneuvering and small tactical tricks. Chinese authorities frequently rely on lower-level security personnel or volunteer forces to enforce measures that fall outside previously agreed arrangements, such as blocking passageways or temporarily detaining people. When the American side reacts, Chinese officials can then attribute the incident to technical misunderstandings or language issues involving lower-ranking personnel. But the true objective is often to assert control and create psychological pressure on the opposing side. The incident in which members of the American press delegation had their drinking water confiscated and their access to restroom facilities restricted despite intense heat was another example of this type of tactic. It may also have been intended to allow Chinese authorities to control information and monopolize the visual imagery they wanted to limit from reaching the outside world. American and Chinese leaders shaking hands and smiling together, but is the outside world truly reassured? Ladies and gentlemen, the carefully selected images circulating on social media and broadcast through international media outlets may create the illusion of a relaxed diplomatic tour. Warm handshakes, friendly gestures, and leisurely walks through the vast courtyards of the Forbidden City seem to paint a picture of peace and stability. Yet behind that curtain was a suffocating race against time involving security forces from both sides, where tensions and direct confrontations never truly stop. Behind the scenes were quiet staff members forced to endure pressure, humiliation, and even physical injury in order to preserve the dignity and security of their respective nations. However, beyond all of the backstage confrontations, what the international community is truly watching with bated breath is the real substance of the agreements reached between the world's two superpowers. Will the growing closeness between Washington and Beijing bring greater stability to humanity? Or will it push smaller nations into increasingly difficult positions on the geopolitical chessboard? The biggest and most sensitive question right now is what will happen to Taiwan under any potential agreements or compromises between the two superpowers. As technology, financial, and military interests are placed on the scale, could some form of strategic trade-off already have been decided behind closed doors in Beijing? That remains one of the great unanswered questions of our time. The answer will likely not be found in polished press releases, but instead gradually revealed through strategic moves in the months and years ahead. We will continue watching closely. With that, today's program comes to a close. We invite you to share your thoughts and personal perspectives.